Riding Economic Waves, How to Protect Your Bucket List During Financial Uncertainty. Join the bucket list accountant himself, David Patterson, as we discuss how to navigate economic shifts and financial uncertainty with confidence. Learn why understanding your own financial data is more important than media headlines. Discover the power of personal budgeting without guilt or judgment, and gain practical strategies for creating financial buffers against unexpected changes. This episode provides actionable steps to maintain your bucket list dreams even during economic fluctuations. I'm your co-host Anthony Perl. Let's get into making your bucket list happen. David, we live in some interesting times, as everyone likes to say, but there's a lot of economic shifts going on, and you constantly hear people talking about ups and downs, and depending on where they are in the world, it's a difficult thing to have to deal with, but it's a reality.
Certainly is a difficult thing, and some of the things that are discussed, the economic things that are discussed, you potentially don't fully understand what it is and what they mean and what the ramifications are for you, and certainly for the way they're reported, there's always a bit of doom and gloom associated with any of these discussions, which, from your own personal thought process doesn't help in the situation at all.
Yeah, I think that's part of it as well, isn't it? There's the coping with it, but there's also in two levels. There's the being ready for it in terms of your finances, but also being ready for it mentally, because there's a lot of distractions and it's hard. You can get absorbed in that. I know you and I would have heard the saying before that there are more millionaires, made in times of downturn than any other time. But it's being able to put yourself in that mindset and in that space to capture that opportunity. All of those things are difficult to achieve.
Oh, absolutely they are. And I heard someone say the other week, and I'm going to butcher it, but the more you can ignore the noise and the hype and the media and actually focus on the actual data and the detail of what it is they're talking about, the easier it becomes to understand and the easier it becomes to see what the impact is going to be on you. Because I think in a lot of circumstances, take interest rates, for example, any sense of an interest rate rise, it's just reported about how much it's going to cost a family and what that's going to mean. And there's a lot of negative connotation to it. But I think if you have the capacity to be able to dig down and go, okay, well, if it is an interest rate rise, rather than look at what the average mortgage is, which is what normally gets reported, look at what your mortgage is and what the impact for you is. And I think that can give you a much clearer picture of what that impact's going to be rather than the way it gets reported to people.
I think it's also true in the reverse, isn't it? Because where there are potential cuts in interest rates doesn't mean you should straight away go out and go, well, I've got an extra $100 a week, I'm going to go spend it.
No, definitely not. I think any of these kind of economic changes that come about, the more you have a handle over your own personal budget, I think the easier it becomes to be able to ride the ups and ride the downs of these things. And particularly the good outcomes. So an interest rate cut, for example, that's going to put more money into your pocket. And from my perspective, I'd be encouraging people then to put that money aside for their bucket list items, so that they can maybe bring forward some of the things that they want to do rather than just sort of spend it in the week to week on things that probably don't matter as much.
Yeah, that's easy to do, isn't it? It's easy to be standing in the supermarket and going, oh, I'll have this and I'll have this and I'll have this. And, the bill's $20, $30 more, but then it's $20, $30 more every week. Or, some people shop more than once a week and suddenly that rises and then you start feeling as though you need those items all the time. So you keep buying them. And then when the prices rise, it can get you into a spiral.
Absolutely. And again, that's where I come back to having a good understanding of where you spend your money. Having a budget for your personal spending, I think, is very, very important. And it's not just a case of having a budget so that you're over where you're spending your money. It's about understanding where you're spending your money and being comfortable with that. I think a lot of cases, clients don't want to do a budget because they're worried about what it's going to show. But I think the more important element is knowing where you're spending your money. It's not a guilt exercise. It's an understanding exercise so that you can then, if an unexpected event happens and you know exactly where you're spending your money, you can do a quick review and go, okay, well, maybe given that the interest rates, as an example, have gone up, that's going to eat into my budget by $100. Have a little bit of a look and an understanding of where you're spending your money, scale it back a little bit without the stress that goes with how am I going to afford an extra $100 on my mortgage. Those that have a really good understanding of what money's coming in and where their money goes, I think can adapt much quicker to a adverse economic change.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's something that you have to work at, right, in understanding where it's coming and where it's going. The coming in is relatively easy to understand, but the going out can sometimes be a little bit harder because there's often lots of little bits and pieces, isn't there? And it's trying to encapsulate that, and the whole concept of doing a budget can be quite daunting. So working with someone such as yourself is important in that aspect.
Oh, absolutely is. And it certainly is daunting. And I think it's daunting in a way that I think doing a budget's got a really negative connotation, I think, to it. I think when you're asking people to do a budget, their first thought is, one, are they going to judge me for where I'm spending my money? And two, they're going to ask me to cut spending in certain areas. For me, the budget is anything but that. It's about getting a really deep understanding of where your money goes. And it may be that you get a surprise to say, gee, I didn't realize I was spending this much money on coffees, for example. I can cut back on those a little bit to allow us to have more money available for something else, a holiday or whatever it might be. So it's not a guilt exercise. It's not a cost-cutting exercise. It's a understanding exercise. And once you understand the data and know the data, then you can make more informed and better decisions.
And it's interesting when you say the coffee example is a good one. I know we did this exercise as a family, although I don't drink coffee, but my wife and daughter do. And they worked this out some time ago and said, well, if we stop buying the coffees and we put it towards buying a coffee machine, ultimately that investment's going to pay off.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess it's the enjoyment from the coffee and what the experience is. I mean, I enjoy going down to my local coffee shop in the mornings and just sitting there, maybe read a book, but just being the out-of-home environment and just having, this might sound terrible, just having someone else make the coffee for you and bring it over. It's a relaxing time. It's a half an hour out of my day where you can just sort of sit back and enjoy the coffee. But it also, you rightly pointed out, it also gives you the opportunity to say, well, the coffee machine makes just as nice a coffee as where I'm out, and it's the coffee that I'm going for, not the half an hour out of my day kind of thing. So it kind of works both ways.
This podcast is brought to you by bucketlistakcounting.com.au. Speak to David Patterson and his team if you want to take better control of your life and business, helping small business owners like you be successful designing the life of your dreams. Go to bucketlistakcounting.com.au or check out the show notes for more information. Now back to the program. Yeah, exactly. It's part of the experience, isn't it? That you have to work out what the value is, because there are some things where it's easy to say, well, a cup of coffee costs me $4.50 or whatever it costs, but it's the experience that you can't always put a price on. It's the walking into the coffee shop and, them knowing who you are and having a little bit of a conversation about it, sitting and enjoying the sunshine, the passing traffic, whatever it might be. All of that's part of it, and it's hard to always put a price on those things.
100%, and that's where it just comes down to your individual choices, and we all have sort of things that we like differently, which is great. And that's the important part of the budget, going, well, okay, I'm spending this much on coffees, but I really get a great enjoyment of being able to take time out and go and sit and watch people go by, watch whatever it is, wherever you're having your coffee. I think it's important to acknowledge the enjoyment that you get from it and not look at it detrimentally, but look at it as something that you enjoy.
I think that goes the same for lots of little items that we had, isn't it? I mean, subscriptions is a good example. The subscription to Netflix, for argument's sake, you can look at it and say, oh, well, we can save this much money a month and not worry about that because there's plenty of things on TV that are free to air, for example. But on the other hand, if that time is, you and your partner, potentially with the kids sitting and watching something, that, what is the price you put on that enjoyment that might be, an hour or 2 hours a week?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think we subscribe to most streaming channels at the minute. But we get enjoyment out of it. Each of them offer something a little bit different. And like you said, it's a good opportunity to sort of sit down together and watch something that we both enjoy watching in our circumstance. And again, it's an understanding of we can fit those subscriptions into our budget. It doesn't prevent us from doing anything else. And so you get enjoyment out of it, and that's part of what we are. Someone else might be completely different, which is fine. You know, they might not have any subscriptions. They might have one. It really becomes a personal choice.
And it is a really interesting thing because, there's a lot of, coming back to it, there's a lot of talk about cost of living crisis, prices rising, and it's easy to poke at those little things and say, you don't need that, and you don't need that, and you don't need that. But that can be where all of your enjoyment comes from in those things, and the price that you put on that is worth a lot more than what the actual spend is. So when it comes to cost of living crisis and having to ride some of these waves, it's not always those things that should be things that you look at, where do I save, as part of the process.
Absolutely. And the cost of living crisis is probably a really good example that you bring up, because I don't know, for months and months and months now, that's been the sort of catchphrase that's getting put out on the news constantly, the cost of living crisis. And it can make you think and worry about how you're going to afford different things. But again, I'll get back to the whole budgeting. If you have a really good idea of where your money's being spent and where it's being allocated, you see that cost coming before it actually comes in a lot of cases. So you have the ability to be able to plan for it. And you're right, it's not a case of just slashing another cost sort of ad hoc. It's about understanding the areas that you get a lot of enjoyment, the areas where you get some enjoyment, and the areas which are just essential costs that you have to have, and reviewing which of those you can sort of refine in the short term to ride that cost of living crisis as it comes through.
Yeah, and you talked to an important point there as well, that we all fall victim to what becomes media hype as well. So we start to believe what we hear because we hear it often enough. Is there really a cost of living crisis? Is crisis the right term? It's a lovely headline, but what's the reality for you? And if you're planning ahead, then it might, and it should not be, a crisis.
No, and you're right. What it is, it's a media headline to get people to click through to read an article, isn't it? If you have a good understanding of your cash flow, what it becomes is it's just a slight change in where money's. It shouldn't be a crisis. It should be a manageable event. A crisis is kind of, to me, that's a lot bigger event than, your electricity going up by a couple of $100 a year. Not to downplay, that is not going to have a major impact on people, but it's manageable, I think, in most cases.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that we often point to things like electricity, to petrol prices, and say, well, things have gone up so dramatically. And they do, petrol particularly, and electricity does have a flow-on effect because they tend to get passed on. But they're only small little differences. It's rarely a massive jump in the grand scheme of things. So you have to create a buffer zone, don't you, in what you're doing as far as personal planning is concerned?
Absolutely, you do. And one of the things that we do at home is we pay a weekly amount to our electricity company. So just we've worked out roughly how much it's going to cost for a year. And every week we just pay a certain amount in straight to them so that it comes out of our account and to them, so that at the end of the cycle, when we get our new bill, there's no real major surprise. And we've done that for school. When the kids were at school, we did that for school fees, just paid regular amounts in, as part of our weekly or fortnightly budget. And we've found that's worked really well for us to overcome any major hiccups in our cash flow with a, say, electricity bill that's gone up more than we expected, because we've paid sort of on a weekly basis. The top up that we have to do is only really small, and it doesn't really affect us as much.
And I gather the same logic applies to small business owners, that I know you deal with a lot of those as well, that planning in the same sort of way so that you're not immediately going, right, our electricity bill's gone up, the petrol's gone up, so we're raising our prices by X%.
Yeah, absolutely. If from a business perspective, it's the same thing. If you've got a reasonable understanding of your expenses, then any increase in these other costs, you don't have to have a knee-jerk reaction to them. You can work your way through them in a planned kind of systematic way so that you're not making rash decisions just bumping prices up because the perception is that the fuel cost, for example, is going to really bite you from a bottom line perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's an important aspect, isn't it? I mean, if every time there's this feeling that prices have gone up somewhere, immediately impacts the next person, then inflation's going to go through the roof and all of us are going to find it almost impossible to live. The reaction cannot be from business immediately that we need to raise prices. And, we're pushed all the time, of course, in business. There are wage increases that we have to cope with. There are all of these other things that have to happen along the way. But it's important to realize, isn't it, that you have to plan for these ups and downs and ride the wave in some way and realize that sometimes maybe there's 1 or 2% less profit at this point, but down the line, there's going to be 1 or 2% more profit.
Absolutely. And I think it's just getting back to having that greater understanding. I mean, you can't predict 100% all your costs for the next 12 months, but you can get a reasonably good idea. And as part of that system of having an understanding of what your costs are going to be is also building in a cash flow buffer. So having money set aside in the bank when you can to counter any of these unexpected rises in costs so that you can firstly meet the cost, then you can sort of analyze it a little bit more and make more of a informed decision on price increases rather than a knee-jerk reaction to increased prices. I think that overall control over how your business is run becomes really, really important, and it certainly allows you to handle those adverse situations a lot better.
I think the important thing for people listening in to understand as well is that having a relationship with your accountant to help guide you on this is really important. And if you don't get that from your current accountant, then contact David. But but that's the truth, isn't it? That it tends to be that people are sitting there, might be listening to this right now, thinking, "Oh my goodness, there's a whole lot of things that I've got to do, and how do I go about it?" And it's a bit overwhelming. But you should be being helped through this process.
100%. And the one thing I would say is that the clients of ours that we meet regularly, so quarterly meetings where we're reviewing performance and planning, the next quarter, those clients find it a lot easier to manage any unexpected circumstances because they're a lot more over their business and over their financial situation. So the constant planning sort of prevents any sort of rash decision-making or sort of stress about a change in circumstances. So you're right, to have someone that you can bounce off constantly helps you ride those waves, both good and bad.
Well, it's a good point for me to say, because you're too modest to do it, to remind everyone to check out the show notes of how to get in contact with David, because you really do need to work with David or someone like him to maximise your opportunity to achieve your own bucket list and ride the waves. The Bucket List Accountant podcast is brought to you by David Patterson and his team at Bucket List Accountant. Go and visit their website for more information, details, of course, in the show notes. I'm Anthony Perl, your host from Podcast Done For You. We look forward to having your company in the next episode.